Hello, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Adam Portner of ProdegeMR, and depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm excited to be co-presenting with Chris Havemann, CEO of RealityMine. And today we're going to be talking about the power of real-time behavioral data in the video on-demand era. And this webinar should take approximately half an hour or so, and there's an opportunity to ask questions at the end. So please, if you have a question, please submit it, and then we'll be able to address that at the end of the study. So let's get started. So before I talk a little bit about the project that we conducted together, let me tell you a little bit about Protege, and a little bit about what we bring to the table, and then I'll turn it over to Chris, who will speak to RealityMine, and then we'll get into the details of the project that we conducted. Protege has been around since 2005. We established a double opt-in market research panel about 10 years ago. It's our 10-year anniversary. About 5 years ago, we established our mobile panel, and that's been very helpful for projects such as this with metering, geofencing, surveys on the go. It's a great way to connect with our respondents. A few years ago, we acquired a company that some of you may have heard of called MyPoints, and that's just one of our consumer-facing brands for conducting market research and keeping people engaged through a variety of activities. Last year, we delivered over 30 million survey completes to give you a sense of the power and the breadth of our panel. And just this year, we're developing a new capability that will help augment behavioral data by having people take pictures of their receipts that can be uploaded, and then we can identify what people are purchasing and use that for better targeting purposes. Now, part of the reason that we're able to be successful at delivering on less traditional research methodologies, as we'll be talking about today, unique capabilities with metering and survey data, is really through the diverse recruitment method that we have across bloggers and publishers, TV and radio, live trivia, referrals, organic search, a number of different approaches that help us keep our members engaged in a variety of activity that is really contributing to this component of the study. Now, with that as a foundation, let me turn it over to Chris, who'll speak to RealityMine. Chris?
Thanks, Adam. So just some headlines on RealityMine, and I think many of you attending know a little bit about us, but the company was established back in 2012, so a little bit younger than Protege. We're a technology provider, and we provide technology solely to the market research industry. So our clients are pretty much the large market research agencies, but also many small and medium-sized agencies, literally around the world. So we have clients in every major region of the world. And we'd like to think we're the gold standard for passive metering. I'm going to come on in the next couple of slides and talk a little bit about what passive metering actually is. That metering is on both mobile and desktop, so on Android, iOS, Windows, and Mac OS. I think importantly, particularly in these days of heightened concerns around privacy and so on, important to state that our technology is ISO 9001 and 27001 certified, so that's the information security standard, and we operate with GDPR compliance globally. So when we're working with panel partners, we work with them to ensure that everything is GDPR compliant. So it's based on explicit opt-in, very clear and transparent in terms of what we're doing with data. If we skip on to the next slide, Adam. Just a little bit then about how passive metering works. So as I said, it's technology, it's software that sits on a device. And in this slide, you've obviously got a mobile phone. And it allows us to capture information about the apps and app usage of members of the panel who've opted in to have the software on their device, information about websites, also information about things like streaming media. So the study that we're about to talk to you about was about streaming media in particular over the holiday period. And then in terms of deliverables, that's delivered to clients through various forms, data feeds, APIs, dashboards, and so on. Just a little bit more then on the next slide in terms of what types of data passive metering captures. So in no particular order, I've mentioned web and app data, but also we can capture information and quite an interesting level of detail about ad exposure, for example, YouTube videos, but also the YouTube advertising. Location data, which is quite common on mobile devices. Search data, and that's both search on the major search engines like Google, but also within certain environments like Amazon. Video viewing we've talked a little bit about, and also shopping behavior. So, for example, within the Amazon ecosystem or within the Walmart ecosystem, we can track the e-commerce journey that panelists are making. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Adam, and he's going to talk a little bit about the setup for the study that we did together.
Great, thanks, Chris. So just to give some foundation in terms of the timing, Chris and I initially presented the results of this study in February at London Quirks. And the reason I mention that is because the project that we did in this case was surrounding the holiday period. So I'll get into the timing of this, but obviously December, early January timeframe, and we presented the following month. So just want to point out the speed with which this type of research can be conducted. Even though here we are in May, this research was done a few months ago, but it doesn't mean that it takes a few months to deliver. So just putting that in foundation. We netted out with 532 members or respondents that participated in this project, 50-50 gender split, U.S. market, 18 plus. And the criteria for qualification were that they must have watched videos on their smartphones 1 time a week or more. And also, we had the members install the RealityMine meter app on their smartphone. And we did this during the time frame of December 14th through January 4th, December 14th last year through January 4th of this year. And then subsequent to that time frame, we had people conduct a 15-minute post-metering survey. January 7th through January 11th was the field time of that. And a couple of notes to get to the 532, if you have to think about all the different steps in the process. So first we had people that were recruited initially through a screener, meaning that they met the criteria and they agreed to install the app. And then we had a percentage of those people that actually followed through and successfully installed the app once we sent them instructions. And of the people that installed the app, 2/3 kept the app on their phones for a full 3-week period, which relative to other studies is a pretty long time frame. You can do a study of metering, and Chris can speak to this, that are much shorter time frames, but we kept it on for 3 weeks, and over 2/3 of the people did that. And then another figure that's strong is 95% of the people who installed the app for that 3-week period also took the survey afterwards. So this speaks to the power of the panel source, as well as the value of the information that can be derived. We'll get into on the why and the how and the what. So the passive metering, as well as the information behind the survey that we conducted about that topic. So they needed to qualify for all these components in order to receive their incentive. So with that as a foundation, let's talk a little bit about the how and the what are people watching on their phones. So the how is the survey data, and the what is the meter data. So it's an example of the power of the combination of the self-reported information via surveys and the behavioral data through passive metering. So from the how, survey data told us that 54% of watch video content on their phones while alone. And this really isn't surprising, given that a phone is such a personal device, but it's also worth showcasing as a reminder to marketers that video via phone is a way to reach people when they're more engaged. No one else is around to distract them. And from the what, user-generated content is this is the metered information, is by far the most popular form of content, followed by news, comedies, and children's content. So we can see what people are watching and how they're watching. Another data point, and there's so much information that was derived from this study, but we're highlighting a few of the insights that were generated to give you a flavor of the benefits of this approach. So we talked about how and what, but also we can learn from the why, and this is also from survey data. So we have some comparisons here between Netflix subscribers and other forms of video content. Primarily YouTube is very popular. And so we asked people why they watch video content on their phones, and watching content on Netflix is really not as much about escapism. It's more about catching up on shows and movies, whereas it's a key factor for those watching content on YouTube and other services. So you can see how it really differs between the type of content that they're watching and the why behind their usage. Now, survey data helps us to broaden the analysis beyond the timeline of the metered information. The metered information is really powerful and helpful, but we can ask questions outside of that timeline or the devices, and so these next two slides highlight that. So over 4 in 10 survey respondents watched more video content on their phones during the holiday period than prior, whereas 1 in 4 watched less. So even though we did this meter during the holiday period, we can ask them questions about their behavior and whether it was more or less. We also saw some interesting variations across demographics. For heavier video consumption, there was a higher index for males than females. The type of content that people watched, more comedy, more user-generated content, and also more prominent use of video for holiday gift-giving inspirations and sharing content with friends and family. Obviously, this is directly linked to the time frame. If we were to do this study this time frame, we'd ask probably different types of questions. But it's interesting how people are using this as an approach to get inspiration. And Chris will speak to a bit more on the shopping insights that were derived later in the presentation. Now, as I mentioned, we can talk about the time frame, pre and post holiday period. We did this study on smartphones only, but it's really helpful to go beyond that and learn more. So our focus for this was just on the smartphone video on demand usage, but we also gained valuable insights on self-reported information on consumption of video on demand through other devices. So not surprisingly, desktop or laptop computers have the highest reported usage, followed by connected devices for TV, tablets, and gaming systems, which had a bit of a gender skew for males. So this shows the combined meter and survey methodology really allowed us to broaden our analytical insights to include what, how, and why of video on demand consumption. And with that, now I'll turn it over to Chris, who will speak to some more insights that we gathered from the metered data. Chris?
Thanks, Adam. So just moving on to the next slide then, just to contrast again some information about Netflix and YouTube. So I think from the survey data, we knew that 81% of the people were in households or personally subscribed to Netflix. The rest of this data is behavioral data from the meter. And astoundingly high, if you think about it, 87% of the people with the passive data streaming watched video on YouTube, and that's either on youtube.com or the YouTube app. So the metering technology allows us to see both. So very, very high penetration of YouTube usage. And on the Netflix subscribers, 22% of those with an account watched on their phones, which obviously means that the balance was watched on other types of devices, or in that particular time they didn't watch Netflix at all. So very different frequency, and you can see the frequency on the bars on the right-hand side, just in general, both in terms of within the month, but also within the day. people going for YouTube for sort of shorter and sharper but more frequent viewing occasions. And if we flip on the slide again, just looking at occasions again, watching video content, and here again you see Netflix. People typically 1 to 4 occasions on the left-hand pie chart. Adam, could you just, that's it, thank you. Viewing occasions for Netflix much lower than YouTube. So the YouTube guys on the right, you've got more than half watching anywhere from 5 to 9 up through 30+ occasions in the study period. Mean of 15, whereas Netflix is down at 7.7. So across the period, and that's consistent with the data that Adam presented earlier, which was people are using Netflix to catch up on shows, so they'll typically be watching for longer. YouTube, you're maybe getting away from it all, you're doing it more on your own, you're looking for a bit of distraction, but you might watch whatever you're watching for a much shorter period of time. Okay, so going a bit deeper on YouTube, I'm going to hand back to Adam again.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So I have just a couple slides here to dig in more on deeper insights on specific platforms. So not only can we look at the overall across streaming video on demand, but let's look at details associated with individual platforms and how they may differ. So we found that 43% of users watched at least 10 minutes per day on average. This is from the meter data. And just the visual here, they might not all be watching cat videos, but it's quite a daily habit that they have. And some interesting profile data that emerged from this group. So they're highly indexed to younger people, have a heavier usage of phone during midday versus the evening. And it could be that they're switching over to other devices outside of the phone. It's very likely. And also it's highly indexed with the type of content that they're accessing, their favorite bloggers, staying connected with news and trends. It's really interesting, the celebrity transformation that we've seen in the last 10 to 12 years since the advent of YouTube, with YouTubers, influencers, those followers have millions of followers as another medium tool in connecting directly with their fans. Now let's talk a little bit about Netflix. It's quite a different group. So let's look at how Netflix users behave compared to non-Netflix users. And they're less likely to watch video on their phone to, quote, take a break from the holiday celebrations, or that they need some alone time. And that differs from YouTube consumers. And this aligns with what we learned earlier, that when and how people consume video on demand services differs by brands. And some influencing variables that are contributing to these differences could include the length of the content by brand. YouTube tend to be shorter content than Netflix. Availability of other devices. Maybe during the day, TV is not as available as in the evening. And the type of content that people are accessing, movies versus short-form video. So interesting differences between these groups. And now I'll turn it back over to Chris, who will speak to some final metering insights.
Thanks, Adam. So I mentioned earlier that one of the things that we can get from the metered data is information about e-commerce, so obviously which websites people are going to, but also within Amazon and now Walmart, actually a lot of detail about the journey within those sites and those apps in terms of people's shopping behavior. But we were just interested to see, and this again is this high-level findings, but we were interested to see if we contrasted the Netflix user base with the non-Netflix user base, and then we looked at visits to certain e-commerce sites in the US. Would we see any pattern? And in fact, we did. We saw that if you pick 3 big US e-commerce sites, Amazon, Target, Walmart, the Netflix users absolutely over-indexed in terms of visiting those sites, whereas the non-users less so. Now, clearly there could be a whole bunch of reasons for that, to do with general online usage, age and demographic profiles and so on. But I think what it starts to point to is if you have the combination of the survey data and the behavioral data, and you're a marketer, you could start to think about whether it's Amazon or YouTube, your advertising strategy. You could start to think about promotional strategies if you're interested in taking advantage of the correlation between Netflix use and some of those sites. So just a very sort of high-level flavor, but a snapshot of what's possible. So if we move on to our final slide. So I think the question arises, what's next? So we've just started with this area of behavioral data, really, and passive data. It's huge amounts of interest, but I think from our perspective, I think one of the things I strongly believe is that the research world over many decades has kind of followed the consumer, and it's our job as researchers to follow that consumer as the consumer changes their behavior, adopts technology, fragments. So that's happened obviously from the survey world, from the old offline surveys into telephone and then into online surveys. Mobiles arrived, and now we do mobile surveys. But we see ever greater fragmentation, ever greater digitization. I think the bad news, or perhaps the good news, is that's only going to happen more and more, and probably at a faster rate. So we're now in a world of Alexa and Siri and voice assistants. We're in a world of ever more connected homes, autonomous vehicles, and so on. And I think what this kind of points to is that the combination of survey data, understanding the why, getting consumers to reveal their preferences and what they're thinking about things, combined with behavioral data actually observing behavior, is the key and ultimately the holy grail of 360-degree consumer understanding. So I think that wraps up the sort of fixed part, and we've left a good 7-8 minutes as intended for questions. And I can see these. I'm not sure you can, Adam, but I'm going to read out a couple of questions and see how we go.
Okay.
So the one that's come in just literally about a minute ago was the survey taken on mobile, via computer, laptop, browser, or both? So can you talk, Adam, in terms of how you deployed the surveys to this group?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to clarify, there are two components. So we have the meter component that was done on smartphones, and Chris can speak to this, that they have the ability through the meter to incorporate other devices. But for the methodology of this study, we just did it on the smartphone. Doesn't mean that it's limited to that. And the survey, people can take the survey subsequently on their smartphone or on their desktop. It didn't have to be tied to the smartphone only. So it was enabled for smartphones, but was conducted either on a laptop or a smartphone.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Okay, another question that's come in is, can you share what you consider best practice in terms of incentives for these metered and survey combination methodologies?
Yeah.
Adam, do you want to take that one again? I mean, obviously, this was a Protege panel, and you incentivized the panel and so on.
Yeah, let's tag team on this. I mean, you could speak to the incentives that you think are appropriate for metered only. In this case, we wanted to get information not just from the meter, but also from the survey. So it's really important. In best practices, I think, to pulse out the incentives. So some incentive associated with downloading the app sometimes is beneficial, and then for each step in the process to receive an incentive. And another approach is that they receive a larger incentive after they finish all components of it. If you conduct surveys where they do 2 out of 3 and you're not getting as much value, but then you're providing an incentive, then that's a sunk cost. So in this case, they receive their incentive once they pass through both the metering, keeping it installed, and then conducting the survey. But the key is that they're informed about that up front, so there are no surprises.
Great, thanks, Adam. I'm just going to come back on that comment you asked about you suggested around metering and what devices you can cover. So today, RealityMine covers 4 core operating systems. That's iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac OS, which means we can cover smartphones, tablets, for the most part, certainly on Android and OS, and desktop and laptop, whether that's a Windows machine or a Mac machine. We're evaluating some sort of in-home options with hardware devices that actually plug into the home network and can look at traffic within the home network, obviously with consent, that could potentially pick up other types of information depending upon levels of encryption. But that's the sort of the breadth of metering capability. There are sort of add-on technologies like ACR, automated content recognition, where of course you can use a device to listen to audio in the background, and so you can effectively listen to, for example, a TV that's playing and potentially match content on that as another form of an extension of metering. I think just going back then to the topic of incentives that Adam mentioned. So I think it's fair to say we see a fair range actually of incentive strategies. Most of the work that our clients do, metering on their panels is continuous. So I think we're in a world where very often they'll establish a stable basis of panelists, and then the incentives are used to maintain retention over a period of time of the metered device. Now, there's a process for installing a meter, but to actually keep it on the device is pretty low effort for a panelist. So we might see many of our clients incentivizing, $2, $3, $4 a month to retain a meter. That can vary depending upon all sorts of things like culture. Also varies according to multiple devices. So there are some studies our clients do where they want to meter more than one device, and then you're into a world of potentially incremental incentives, because you might want to have someone's phone and their tablet and their laptop metered at the same time. So it can depend. Okay, another question that's come in, similar topic but related, is how are you able to have such a high percentage of respondents download the meter and then complete a survey after the 3-week period? Which I think is a good question. Adam, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, each methodology is going to be different and going to get different results. In this case, I think the reason why we're able to get such a higher percentage partly is because of the incentive structure, so we let people know upfront what to expect. The other piece from our panel is that people have, as I showed in the upfront, they take surveys all the time, and so being able to have people do the metering component and then take a survey, having that linkage be communicated up front and throughout the whole path, and it's a natural thing that they're used to doing, makes it that much easier. But it really does help when you have a combination of a strong metering app as well as a strong panel for people that are used to doing a variety of activities. So that way it doesn't require so much recruitment at the top of the funnel to get to the 500 plus completes that we were able to achieve.
Yeah. There's now been a follow-up question, I think for you again, Adam, on this question around the survey that was done in this study. Do you have numbers on how many of those respondents took that survey on desktop versus smartphone devices? I'm not sure you'd have that to hand. Maybe it's something that we can follow up if need be.
Right. No, I don't have that information directly available, but yes, of course, we have that information from the survey respondents. If Andrew wants to email me directly for a follow-up, I'd be happy to help with that.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's all the questions that have come in, unless I'll just have a quick look here on our dashboard. Yeah, no more live. So actually we're up to time. So what I suggest we do then is, if any of you who are on the webinar, and there are quite a few, have follow-up questions, you can see our email addresses on the screen and obviously in the invite information to the webinar. So please feel free to do follow-up questions directly to us, both of us or individually as appropriate, and we'll do our best to respond to you also. Adam, I'll let you sign off, but just a thanks from RealityMine and thanks from me for joining the webinar. I think the content will be made available online, so if you have colleagues who didn't have a chance to see this and you'd like to distribute it to them, we'll make sure that's available. But if you're interested in passive metering, please do get in touch. Adam, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for your participation, and we appreciate the questions and hope you found this information useful. And we look forward to working with you or for exposing you to this type of approach for future opportunities. Very exciting, and it's been great to collaborate with Chris and with RealityMine. So thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Adam.